Hello, family. Enjoy this relaxing moment with Surly Tales. Remember to hit the like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. It means the world to us. Also, share this video with your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. Amina Adamu never imagined that a single nap could change the course of her life. Born to a modest family in the bustling city of Kigoma, she had grown up surrounded by the vibrant sights, sounds, and scents of modern-day Nika, a thriving African nation known for its rich cultural diversity and ambitious leaps in technology, infrastructure, and commerce. Amina's father was a retired schoolteacher, and her mother ran a small food stall in a teeming roadside market. Though Amina was their only child, the family struggled with finances due to the economic fluctuations of the country. Yet, the love within their humble home was always abundant. From a young age, Amina learned to value integrity and perseverance. Despite her hopes of attending university, funding became an obstacle. Determined not to become a burden to her parents, she decided to take on small jobs to support the household. When she was 21, she managed to secure employment as part of the cleaning staff in the presidential mansion, an iconic structure that stood majestically in the capital city of Kigoma. Locals often referred to the magnificent edifice as the People's Home, owing to the progressive image of the newly elected president, Kayode Mbeki. President Kayode Mbeki was a figure that attracted both admiration and controversy in equal measure. A former human rights lawyer, he had come into office on a wave of change and high expectations. At just 42 years old, he was one of the youngest leaders the nation had ever seen. Tall, with a quiet confidence and an electrifying presence, he had a reputation for humility that resonated with the youth of Nika. The media loved him, or at least they used to, in the first few months of his presidency. But as the complexities of leadership unfolded, Kayode Mbeki found himself in a web of political intrigue, intense scrutiny, and personal challenges. The weight of the country's hopes and dreams was heavy on his shoulders. It was under these circumstances that Amina started her job at the presidential mansion. The sprawling building boasted impressive architecture that combined modern African design with centuries-old historical influences. Intricate wood carvings graced the doorways, while bright murals reflecting Nigerian folklore adorned the corridors. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed panoramic views of carefully manicured gardens, dotted with indigenous trees and shrubs. For Amina, stepping into the presidential mansion was like walking into another world, one of orderly grandeur and a disciplined environment. In her early days, Amina kept her head down and her movements brisk as she went about polishing floors and dusting furniture in the offices and guest suites reserved for foreign dignitaries. She rarely saw the president, although whispers among the cleaning staff revealed him to be kind and unassuming. They claimed he sometimes walked the corridors alone in the late evenings, deep in thought, pausing to greet even the night guards with a gentle smile and a wave. Amina's duties often concluded before the president's daily schedule began. She would arrive before sunrise, wiping down the halls, tidying the meeting rooms, and ensuring that every surface sparkled. She took pride in her work, believing that cleanliness was a testament to discipline and dedication. Her supervisor, an elderly woman named Mama Gloria, was a strict taskmaster who believed in punctuality and thoroughness. Under her guidance, Amina learned the standard protocols: never linger near important offices uninvited, never question the dignitaries, and never let personal issues spill into the public domain. One fateful morning, however, exhaustion got the better of Amina. She had helped her mother at the stall until late the previous night, and then she had woken up extra early to handle her duties at the mansion. She began her shift at 4 a.m., sweeping and mopping the floors near the main corridor leading to the president's private office. Though it was rare for any of the staff to enter the president's personal study when he wasn't present, that particular morning there had been an urgent request to clean and reorganize the room ahead of an important meeting later in the day. The president's study was spacious yet surprisingly simple in its decor. A prominent dark wooden desk sat at the center, stacked with files that indicated the never-ending tasks of governance. On the walls, framed pictures and pieces of art reflected not just the president's personal tastes, but also Nika's cultural heritage, images of rolling savannas, bustling markets, and vibrant dance festivals celebrating the mosaic of tribes and ethnicities. An imposing window behind the desk allowed a radiant beam of sunlight to filter in, illuminating the large, comfortable armchair where the president often held quick consultations. As Amina dusted the bookshelves, she couldn't help scanning the titles: African history texts, political memoirs, legal case studies, and a smattering of poetry collections. Her curiosity was piqued by this discovery that the president was apparently a lover of both the legal realm and the literary arts. She spent longer than intended, dusting each shelf meticulously and reading the spines of the books, entranced by the variety. Eventually, her weariness returned, a dull throb behind her eyes. She glanced at her watch, barely 6 a.m., and realized she had not taken a break since she arrived. Deciding she needed just a moment's rest, she sank into the wide armchair behind the desk. The luxurious upholstery enveloped her like a warm embrace, and her tense muscles seemed to relax instantly. Sleep was the furthest thing from her mind when she first closed her eyes. Just a little reprieve, she thought, to gather her strength for the next round of cleaning. But sleep claimed her swiftly and surely. The stress of her long days and insufficient nights of rest finally caught up with her. She slipped into a dreamless slumber, unaware that her short nap would turn into something more. Minutes stretched into half an hour, then 45 minutes, and soon an entire hour. Thus was set into motion a chain of events neither Amina nor President Kayode Mbeki could ever have foreseen. In that silent office, a sleepy cleaner and an unsuspecting head of state were on a collision course destined to alter both of their lives forever. Amina slept on, blissfully unaware that the door to the president's study would soon open, and that the occupant who stepped inside would be none other than Kayode Mbeki himself. President Kayode Mbeki rarely had the luxury of strolling freely around the presidential mansion, let alone his private study, without being followed by assistants, security personnel, or cabinet members. However, on this particular morning, he managed to slip away from his advisors and slip into his office unannounced. His schedule was relentless: a breakfast meeting with foreign delegates, a press conference, and then several appointments with key business leaders. To prepare himself, he wanted just a few minutes of solitude. The occupant of the study was the last thing he expected to find. Kayode quietly stepped into the office and shut the door behind him. The housekeepers normally finished cleaning his study by dawn, so he was accustomed to seeing everything neatly arranged. But as soon as he crossed the threshold, he noticed something unusual. Someone was in his chair. The tall, comfortable armchair behind his polished desk was turned slightly, revealing the silhouette of a person in a housekeeping uniform. At first, Kayode froze, alarmed that a stranger might have broken into his private space. He quickly looked toward the windows, searching for any signs of forced entry, and then glanced at the bookshelves, but saw nothing amiss. He approached cautiously, feet treading softly on the plush rug. As he came around the side of the desk, he saw Amina slumped in the chair, breathing evenly and deeply, clearly fast asleep. Her cleaning tools, an old rag, a feather duster, and a plastic spray bottle, had slipped to the floor, indicating that she must have been in the midst of tidying up. Stunned, Kayode momentarily forgot to be irritated at the breach of protocol. Instead, he found himself taking a second look at the sleeping figure. She was young, maybe in her early 20s, with delicate features. Her dark hair was neatly braided into rows that framed her face. Despite the plainness of her uniform, Kayode noticed the faint curve of a smile lingering on her lips, as if she were enjoying a pleasant dream. Something about her face, so peaceful yet also etched with traces of fatigue, tugged at his heartstrings in a way he had never felt before. For a moment, the burdens of the presidency lifted from his mind. The stress, the political tensions, and the unending demands of leadership all fell into the background. He saw not just another staff member who had dozed off on duty, but a person who appeared overworked and exhausted, someone with her own untold story of trials and joys. The instant wave of empathy he felt was startling. He had never truly believed in love at first sight, finding such notions romantic but naive. Yet there he stood, transfixed by the rise and fall of the chest of a woman he'd never spoken to. He sighed, pulling himself back to reality. He needed to gently rouse her, if only to avoid an even greater scandal should others find out. In a place where every minor indiscretion was magnified by the public eye, the last thing he wanted was for the media to catch wind that a housekeeper had been caught sleeping in the president's own chair. Kayode took a step closer, hesitated, then leaned in. His voice was soft yet authoritative. "Excuse me." He repeated himself once more, but she didn't budge. Tentatively, he placed a hand on her shoulder. She stirred, eyes fluttering open in confusion. It took her a moment to register her surroundings: the president's large desk, the early morning light streaming through the window, and the imposing figure of the man himself standing before her. Panic lit up her face immediately. "Mr. President, I'm so sorry," she stammered, nearly tumbling out of the chair as she scrambled to stand up. Her heart hammered in her chest, and adrenaline flooded her veins. She was convinced her job was already lost. The humiliation of it stung her cheeks, and she couldn't look him in the eye. Kayode, however, smiled kindly. He reached out a steadying hand, lightly brushing her arm in reassurance. "It's quite all right. Take a breath. Are you all right?" The concern in his voice surprised her even more than finding him there. Amina blinked rapidly, attempting to regain composure. She mumbled apologies, mortified at having been caught not just sleeping on the job but in the president's own chair. As she gathered her cleaning items, she avoided looking directly at him. This was a monumental breach of protocol, and she dreaded the possibility of being fired on the spot. The shame coursed through her, and tears threatened to break free from her eyes. But the anticipated scolding never came. Instead, the president calmly requested, "Please, don't worry. What's your name?" His voice was low and gentle, as though he were speaking to a frightened child or a startled deer. She swallowed hard. "Amina," she said quietly. "Amina Adamma, Mr. President." She curtsied a little, a habitual sign of respect she had grown up with. "Amina," he repeated, testing the name on his tongue. "It's nice to meet you, though I wish it were under different circumstances." A subtle warmth passed across his features as he offered her a reassuring smile. In those few seconds, an odd hush fell between them. Amina dared to lift her gaze. Their eyes locked for the briefest of moments, hers filled with anxiety, his with a confusing sense of tenderness. Though she did not fully understand it, she felt something shift in that moment. It was as if an invisible cord snapped taut between them, binding them in an unspoken understanding. It both frightened and intrigued her. Quickly, her training and sense of duty took over. She lowered her eyes again and busied herself with picking up her rag and duster. "I promise this won't happen again, Mr. President," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm truly sorry. I must return to my duties." Kayode parted his lips, ready to protest, to tell her not to worry so much, to reassure her that he wasn't about to punish her. But he knew how the rumor mill worked in the mansion. If word got around that the president was spending too long conversing with a housekeeper, one caught sleeping no less, it could create unnecessary speculation. And he also feared that staff gossip might reflect poorly on her or, worse, lead to her dismissal by more stringent administrators. "Very well," he said at last, forcing himself to keep his tone neutral. "I'll ensure this is forgotten. Just be more careful in the future. Now, go on. Your supervisor might be wondering where you are." Amina nodded vigorously, head bowed, and then scurried out of the office. She didn't dare glance back, not even to confirm the expression on the president's face. But as she walked away, her heart pounded in her ears. She felt a mixture of relief and confusion. Relieved that she was not immediately reprimanded or fired, yet confused by the kindness and warmth she'd experienced. She couldn't deny that the gentle tone of his voice and the tender look in his eyes had made an impression on her. In the empty room, Kayode stood motionless for a moment, as if rooted to the spot. He found himself replaying the encounter in his mind, her startled gasp, the frantic way she apologized, and that fleeting instant when their eyes met. He could still feel the ghost of her presence lingering in the air. He inhaled, releasing a slow breath. Then, turning toward the files on his desk, he set about preparing for the day's meetings. But he already knew that something was different. A seed of curiosity had taken root, and with it, a faint but persistent yearning. Amina Adamma was no longer just a face in the backdrop of the daily hustle. She had become someone he wanted to know, to protect, to understand. And as the sunlight spread across the polished floor of his study, President Kayode Mbeki realized that the morning had forever changed him in a way he never could have predicted. News travels swiftly within the walls of any large establishment, and the presidential mansion was no exception. Though President Kayode Mbeki had sworn to keep the morning's incident a secret, a handful of staff caught wind of the unusual occurrence. Amina's face was easily read by her coworkers. She wore the worry like a scarlet letter. Her obvious anxiety that she might lose her job led to hushed conversations with her closest friend on the cleaning staff, a woman named Chinyere. At lunch in the staff cafeteria, a bright, open space that bustled with chefs, housekeeping personnel, drivers, and secretaries, Amina confided in Chinyere. They sat at a small table, far from prying ears. "He didn't fire me, Chi," Amina whispered, still unsure whether to feel relief or dread. "He actually seemed more concerned about my well-being than anything else. I've never seen anything like it." Chinyere's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Is that so? The president himself? Well, you're lucky, my friend. But be careful. The supervisor might not be as forgiving if she finds out." Amina nodded slowly, stirring her hot rice and stew without much appetite. "He told me not to worry, but I still feel uneasy. I don't want to give them any reason to fire me. My family depends on this job." Chinyere patted her hand gently. "Keep your head down and try not to let it bother you too much. Things happen in this place, strange things. Just do your work well, and everything will be fine." But the strange things Chinyere referred to had little to do with housekeeping blunders. The presidential mansion was a microcosm of Nika's political climate. Ministers, parliamentarians, foreign dignitaries, and staff from every stratum of life passed through its halls, each bearing their own ambitions, secrets, and alliances. Gossip had a habit of spreading faster than a harmattan breeze, and staff members were not immune to its temptations. Stories were traded like currency. It was inevitable that whispers of a housekeeper found napping in the president's office, a housekeeper the president himself had spared, would become a tantalizing morsel of gossip. There were those who chalked it up to the president's merciful nature, while others wondered if Amina had some hidden connection that protected her from serious consequence. A few cynics even speculated that Amina might have orchestrated the incident for personal gain. But Amina was blissfully unaware of the different narratives forming around her. She was preoccupied with self-preservation and guilt. In the days following the incident, Amina tried her best to avoid any situation that could bring her into the president's path. She started her shifts extra early, long before he was due to arrive at the mansion, and left as soon as her duties were done. She skipped her short breaks to ensure she never again succumbed to exhaustion on the job. As a result, she found herself exhausted in the evenings at home, collapsing into bed much too early to spend quality time with her parents. Still, she reassured herself that the sacrifice was necessary to hold onto her paycheck. Meanwhile, President Kayode found his thoughts straying more often than he cared to admit. In the midst of cabinet meetings or policy discussions, he would recall the young woman with the braided hair and the timid voice. He caught himself scanning the corridors as he moved about the mansion, wondering if he might catch a glimpse of her. But Amina was careful to keep her distance, and their paths did not cross again for over a week. The second time they met was entirely by chance. Kayode had just wrapped up a meeting with a group of environmental activists, who praised him for his new green energy initiative but criticized the implementation process. The discussion had been both invigorating and draining. Seeking a moment of respite, Kayode decided to step outside to the rear gardens, a lush expanse of lawns, flower beds, and winding footpaths. The garden was landscaped with a variety of indigenous plants from across Nika's diverse ecosystems, tall baobab trees, ornamental grasses swaying in the breeze, and vibrant orchids that thrived in the mild climate. As he strolled, he rounded a thick hedge of hibiscus and nearly collided with Amina, who was kneeling beside a bed of marigolds, picking up discarded plastic cups. They both froze. Amina's eyes widened. She hadn't realized the president was there, or she might never have ventured into the garden to tidy up. Kayode, on the other hand, felt a certain thrill race through him at the sudden opportunity. They stared at each other for what felt like too long, neither knowing who should break the silence. Then, almost reflexively, Amina gave a deep bow of respect and mumbled, "Good afternoon, Mr. President." "Good afternoon," Kayode replied gently. He scanned the area, noticing the staff assigned to maintain the garden were nowhere in sight. He realized she must have been asked to clear away leftover trash from an earlier function. "I see you're helping the groundskeepers today?" She nodded. "They needed extra hands," she explained, picking up another crumpled paper and dropping it into a plastic bag she carried. "It's fine, I don't mind." For a moment, Kayode debated whether to continue walking or to pause and speak with her. Protocol demanded that the president maintain a certain distance from the staff, but his heart nudged him otherwise. He took a step closer, inhaling the sweet perfume of the flowers mingled with the subtle scent of the day's heat. "How have you been?" he asked, his tone sincere. "I haven't seen you around since that day." The mention of that day made Amina blush, and she kept her gaze averted, her cheeks warming under the midday sun. "I've been fine, Mr. President," she managed, though her voice trembled slightly. "Thank you for asking. And thank you for not making my life difficult." Kayode studied her for a moment, noticing the faint shadows under her eyes. She looked tired, but she also carried herself with a quiet dignity. "You have nothing to thank me for," he replied softly. "I'm sorry you were so worried. It was never my intention to cause you distress." She nodded, unsure how to respond. It felt surreal to be standing there, having an almost casual conversation with the leader of her country. A swirl of conflicting emotions ran through her: nervousness, respect, confusion, and, to her astonishment, a tiny spark of warmth that seemed to resonate with the president's kindness. "I should get back to work," Amina eventually said, gesturing to the garden waste bag. "I still have more to clean up." Kayode gave a nod, though his own reluctance to end the conversation surprised him. He was a man who dealt in negotiations, treaties, and high-stakes discussions, yet here he was, reluctant to walk away from a brief chat with a cleaner. As he turned to leave, he paused. "You know," he said, "if you ever need anything, any help." He stopped himself. The statement felt too personal. He regrouped. "If there's ever something you'd like to see improved in your department, let me know. I value the comfort and well-being of every staff member here." Amina swallowed, glimpsing his genuine concern. "Thank you, Mr. President," she said, and this time there was a trace of a smile on her lips. "That means a lot." With that, Kayode resumed his walk, the sweet aroma of hibiscus following him like a memory. Amina remained kneeling in the garden, unsure if what had just happened was a dream. Part of her wondered if the president was simply being kind, or if there was something else at play. She couldn't entirely ignore the flutter that seized her stomach whenever she recalled the softness of his voice, the kindness in his eyes. Back inside the mansion, staffers eyed Kayode curiously as he passed. His expression had that faraway look, as though he were still lost in the garden. But none would dare question the president about what, or who, was on his mind. Still, rumors flitted through the corridors like restless spirits, stirring up speculation that the president's unusual mood had something to do with the young housekeeper named Amina. Some brushed it off as imaginative exaggeration. Others, more attuned to subtle shifts, suspected that something remarkable was unfolding, quietly and hidden from the harsh lights of the public stage. For President Kayode Mbeki, the days following his chance encounter with Amina in the garden were hectic. He was finalizing plans for a major infrastructural initiative set to modernize the nation's rural roads, part of his wider vision for connecting remote communities to city centers. The press was relentless, questioning the project's viability and dissecting every budgetary move. International donors needed assurance that their funds were being channeled efficiently, while local businessmen competed for contracts. In the midst of the frenzy, Kayode found himself craving a semblance of normalcy, a reprieve from the relentless demands of leadership. Each evening, after the day's final meeting, he retreated to his private quarters, where he occasionally would open a thick journal to jot down his thoughts. These entries, once detailed commentaries on legislation and political strategies, had begun to include more personal reflections. Increasingly, he wrote of Amina, describing her soft-spoken nature and the resolve in her eyes. There was something about her that made him feel grounded, a reminder that beyond the corridors of power lay ordinary lives filled with real struggles and unassuming courage. Meanwhile, Amina worked diligently. Yet, no matter how vigilant she was, occasional glimpses of the president were inevitable in a place as interconnected as the presidential mansion. She encountered him from a distance during official ceremonies, watching as foreign dignitaries arrived to fanfare. She would observe him from the far end of a hallway, greeting guests with a warm smile and a firm handshake. At times, she felt a little pang in her chest that she couldn't explain. She ascribed it to respect and admiration, never daring to label it anything more. Outside of work, life carried on. Amina's father's health was declining. Old age and a persistent cough plagued him. Her mother struggled to balance the demands of their small food stall with caring for her husband. Amina did her best to contribute financially, sending money home whenever she could. She also visited on weekends if her schedule permitted, bringing along basic groceries and medicine. While her parents were proud of her employment at the presidential mansion, they sensed a distance growing between them. Amina's responsibilities left her with little time or energy to share in everyday family joys, and the weight of her father's condition worried her constantly. One late evening after finishing her shift, Amina hurried down a dimly lit corridor leading to the mansion's service exit. She needed to catch a bus to visit her parents that night because her father's illness had reportedly worsened. Her footsteps echoed on the polished marble floor, her mind consumed by worry and the pressing need to reach home quickly. Rounding a corner, she nearly collided with a tall figure, President Hnigerianfolitales. He stood with a phone pressed to his ear, a frown creasing his brow. Amina gasped in surprise, stepping back abruptly and dropping the small bag she carried, which contained medicine for her father. Tablets and bandages spilled onto the floor. Hnigerian ended his phone call hastily, bending down to help her retrieve the items. "Amina," he said, recognition and concern in his voice. "I'm sorry, I didn't see you coming. Are you okay?" He scooped up a box of cough syrup, scanning the label as curiosity flashed across his face. She nodded, heart pounding. The corridor was deserted, the overhead lights casting elongated shadows of their figures on the walls. "Yes, Mr. President, I'm fine. I was just in a rush." He handed her the medicine, eyeing her nervously. "Is everything all right? You seem worried." Amina's first instinct was to keep her troubles to herself. But when she looked up, the sincerity in his gaze disarmed her. She exhaled slowly, deciding that perhaps a small confession wouldn't hurt. "My father isn't well. I'm going home tonight to check on him." Concern etched lines on Hnigerian's face. "I'm sorry to hear that. Is there anything you need?" She shook her head, forcing a polite smile. "I can manage, Mr. President. Thank you for asking." The expression on his face told her that he wasn't fully convinced. Nonetheless, protocol demanded that he not pry too much into a staff member's personal life. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. "I hope he recovers soon." Amina bowed slightly, murmuring her thanks, and resumed her brisk walk toward the service exit. As she disappeared into the night, Hnigerian felt a stirring in his chest, an impulse to do more, to offer real assistance. For a man used to exercising power on a national scale, it felt strange and disconcerting not knowing how to help one individual in need, especially someone who had inexplicably captured his attention. That night, while Amina nursed her father and stayed awake in the cramped living room of her family's modest home, Hnigerian paced in his private study, struggling to concentrate on the documents before him. His mind wandered to an unscheduled idea. Perhaps the Presidential Medical Unit could supply medications to staff families at a discount, or maybe he could arrange some sort of sponsorship for low-income workers. But the notion seemed complicated by red tape and potential accusations of favoritism. The greater truth was that his concern extended beyond mere administrative support. A worrisome, warm feeling accompanied his thoughts of Amina, pulling him in deeper than any official channel could address. A week later, fate conspired once again to bring them into unexpected proximity. The day had begun with a sudden tropical downpour, a quick but heavy rain that left the mansion's gardens soaked. A scheduled state dinner loomed, and staff scrambled to ensure everything was immaculate. Amina was assigned to help set up the grand banquet hall, adjusting tables, placing centerpieces, and ensuring each gold-rimmed plate was spotless. As she stood by a tall window, checking the alignment of table decorations against the reflection of the outside walkway, she noticed Kayode stepping out onto a balcony overlooking the gardens. The glass doors were slightly ajar, letting in a cool, damp breeze. She could see the tension in his posture, the way his shoulders sagged beneath the crisp suit jacket. He stood there, gazing out at the city skyline, lost in thought. Overtaken by a surge of empathy, Amina hesitated. Common sense told her to continue her work and leave the president alone. But a soft tug at her heart compelled her to draw closer. She slipped through the open doors and found him standing at the railing, a pensive silhouette against the gray sky. The hush of the rain-soaked air formed a cocoon of intimacy around them. When he turned, surprise flickered in his eyes. He hadn't expected anyone to follow him there, least of all Amina. She offered him a faint smile, uncertain of the boundaries she was crossing. "Pardon me, Mr. President. I saw you standing here. You looked worried." Her voice trembled at the absurdity of speaking so candidly to the head of state. Kayode exhaled deeply, the ghost of a weary laugh escaping his lips. "We have this state dinner tonight, and everything seems to be going wrong. Budget shortfalls, disagreements in the cabinet, and an uncooperative foreign delegation. Sometimes, it feels like the entire nation is on my shoulders." Silence wrapped around them. Amina wanted to offer comfort, but words felt inadequate. Without overthinking, she reached out and gently placed a hand on his arm. The gesture was hesitant, but sincere. "You're doing your best, Mr. President." The warmth of her hands seeped through Kayode's jacket, fueling an electric current that raced through him. He glanced down, seeing the genuine concern etched on her face. He forced a smile, placing his own hand lightly atop hers. "Thank you," he whispered. And in that moment, an unspoken understanding passed between them, a fragile thread linking their hearts, woven from empathy, respect, and an inexplicable attraction neither could deny. Outside, the clouds began to part, allowing a stray beam of sunlight to shimmer across the rain-soaked garden. It was a small, fleeting bit of brightness in an otherwise tumultuous day, a sign, perhaps, that even in the shadows of responsibility and social barriers, two souls could find solace in one another. Their hands lingered a moment longer, neither daring to pull away, as though they both recognized this was no simple brush of comfort, but a silent vow of something deeper to come. With each passing week, a secret bond grew between President Kayode Mbeki and Amina Adamma, a bond forged through brief, stolen moments and the exchange of empathetic glances that seemed to speak louder than words. The presidential mansion, however, was a tightrope of formality and guarded interactions. Both Kayode and Amina were acutely aware that any slip could have profound consequences for them and for the nation's perception of its leader. Speculation among the staff was unavoidable. A presidential aide named Majip, a shrewd and politically ambitious woman, had observed the president's recurring gazes in Amina's direction during formal events. Majip took note that the president often lingered in places where Amina worked or passed by. While many staff members dismissed it as incidental or a figment of overactive imaginations, Majip's instincts told her something more was at play. Eager to gain leverage or position herself advantageously, she began to closely track Amina's movements and Kayode's whereabouts, sniffing for a hint of scandal that could be exploited. The mounting tensions of the presidency also cast a dark shadow on Kayode's personal life. He was under immense pressure from political rivals who felt threatened by his push for reforms. State governors complained about budget allocations and threatened to pull their support in the upcoming midterm elections. Meanwhile, foreign policy crises demanded constant attention. Amidst the chaos, Kayode found calm in the few quiet moments he shared with Amina. Sometimes, they would meet in the library corridor at night, Kayode feigning a late reading session, Amina passing through with a dusting cloth or a set of keys that needed returning. Under flickering fluorescent lights, they would speak in hushed tones about life, family, and hopes for the future. These conversations, though brief, fed the growing flame of affection between them. In one such clandestine meeting, Amina spoke about her father's deteriorating condition, how every morning she called home, praying to hear better news. Kaode listened intently, wincing at the sadness in her voice. In a bold moment, he offered to arrange for his personal physician to conduct a house visit. Amina balked, worried it would draw unwanted attention. Kaode relented but pressed a small envelope into her hand, insisting it could help cover medical costs. Amina resisted, tears glistening in her eyes. She did not want charity out of pity, especially from the president. Kaode, however, refused to take it back. "You're helping me more than you realize, Amina," he said softly. "This is the least I can do." With that, he turned to go, leaving a flustered Amina clinging to the envelope, unsure whether to feel grateful or humiliated. The envelope was small, but it held enough money to pay for her father's immediate treatment and medications. Torn between pride and necessity, Amina ultimately used it. The improvement in her father's health was almost immediate, which set her conscience at ease, though her heart wrestled with the debt of gratitude she felt. A secret kernel of guilt lodged in her chest, for she knew she was entering a realm of personal entanglement that might jeopardize not only her job but also Kaode's reputation. Inevitably, their closeness soon came under threat. One afternoon, as Amina was finishing her shift, she was summoned to the office of her supervisor, Mama Gloria. The older woman's lined face was as stern as ever. "Sit," she instructed curtly. Her eyes were hawk-like, scanning Amina's posture for any sign of deceit. "I received a complaint that you've been distracted from your duties. There's talk around the mansion that you've been spending unauthorized time near the president." Cold fear gripped Amina's stomach. "Ma, I swear I have not neglected my responsibilities," she responded, heart hammering. "I only do what is required, and sometimes we cross paths. I would never." Mama Gloria's hand shot up, silencing her. "Don't lie to me, girl," she scolded. "We serve at the pleasure of the president. But you must understand our place. You, especially, must keep your distance. These rumors can destroy you if you're not careful. Do you understand?" Amina nodded, swallowing the knot in her throat. She left the office with a warning ringing in her ears, feeling like she was teetering on the precipice of a cliff. That evening, she resolved to speak to Kaode and end whatever was brewing between them for the sake of both their reputations. The opportunity arose sooner than expected. After dinner, Amina was tidying a hallway near the private quarters when Kaode approached, his face lighting up at the sight of her. "Amina," he greeted softly. But the smile faded as soon as he noticed her tense expression. She looked around warily. "We need to talk," she whispered. "Not here." She led him into a small, unoccupied sitting room nearby, its walls adorned with historical portraits of former leaders. Shutting the door behind them, she took a shaky breath. "Mr. President, we have to stop this. The rumors are getting out of hand. My supervisor called me in today. People are watching us." Kaode stepped forward, concern etched into his features. "I understand your worry," he said gently. "But it's unfair that we can't even speak." "Is that what they want?" Amina's eyes brimmed with tears she struggled to hold back. "It doesn't matter what's fair. We have to be realistic. You're the president, Kaode. And I'm just a cleaner." He winced at the emphasis. "Don't say it like that." "But it's the truth," she insisted, shoulders slumping in defeat. "One day, you'll move on with your life. Maybe you'll marry someone from a powerful family or a reputable background. That's what everyone expects of you. That's how it always happens." A tense silence weighed on them. In the soft glow of the wall sconce, Kaode stared at Amina, struggling to articulate the conflict in his heart. "I've never cared for what society or the public expects of me. I only care about doing what's right, for my people and for my own heart." He reached out tentatively, taking her hand in his. "Amina, I know the obstacles. But I also know how I feel whenever I'm near you, or even when I just think about you." A sob escaped Amina's lips. She pulled her hand away, pacing the room. "You feel it, but you don't understand what it means for me. I have my parents, my father's health. I can't risk losing this job. This is the only way I can support my family. His eyes flashed with empathy. I can help you in other ways. And that's exactly the problem, she cried, voice quivering. If people see you helping me too much, they'll assume the worst. They'll say I traded favors for your generosity. They'll say you're neglecting the country's interests for a mere housekeeper. Please, we have to put an end to this. Kayode nodded, trying to keep the anguish from overwhelming him. I'll do whatever is best for you, Amina, he murmured. But you deserve more than to be trapped by fear. If ending this is truly what you want, I'll respect your decision. Just know that I will always stand by you, one way or another. Amina gave a tremulous nod. Though her heart screamed that this was not what she wanted, she believed it was the sensible path. She slipped out of the room, leaving Kayode alone amidst the solemn portraits of past heads of state, each frame a reminder of the sacrifices and constraints that came with wielding power. Over the next few days, Amina avoided him entirely, immersing herself in work as she tried to forget the warmth of his voice, the gentle touch of his hand. Kayode, for his part, threw himself into governance, fighting a profound sense of loneliness in the midst of countless staff and aides. And in the background, Majib's watchful eye flicked from corridor to corridor, quietly amassing tidbits of information, waiting for the right moment to strike. Weeks turned into a month, and a heavy tension enveloped the presidential mansion. The hustle and bustle of official duties continued unabated, but there was an undercurrent of anticipation in the air. Unbeknownst to Amina, Majib had orchestrated a small network of informants, determined to catch any sign of impropriety between the president and the young cleaner. However, in the weeks following Amina's heartbreaking decision to keep her distance, Kayode and Amina rarely even occupied the same space for more than a fleeting moment. Life outside the mansion also marched on. Amina's father had stabilized thanks to the treatment paid for with Kayode's gift. Though grateful, Amina couldn't help the persistent remorse nibbling at her conscience for having accepted it. She debated whether to return the unspent portion, but she hesitated. Would doing so draw more attention? She felt trapped in a moral quagmire and longed for simpler days before her path ever crossed that of Nika's most powerful man. Then came the day that threatened to unravel everything. A major scandal involving a cabinet minister erupted, allegations of misappropriated funds from an agricultural development project. The press had a field day, and Kayode found himself embroiled in damage control. He publicly promised a thorough investigation, only to be stabbed in the back by several senior politicians who had ties to the accused minister. They began distancing themselves from Kayode, fueling rumors that he was losing his grip on the presidency. That evening, weary from countless meetings, Kayode retreated to the library, one of his favorite sanctuaries in the mansion. At this late hour, the library was usually deserted. Illuminated by a single lamp, the long rows of books cast wavering shadows on the parquet floor. Kayode settled into a chair, his hand absently flipping through the pages of a dusty legal tome he was too exhausted to truly read. As fate would have it, Amina was tasked with one last cleaning round of the library that same night, though she'd hoped to avoid the space. Her heart sank when she spotted a figure already there, but leaving abruptly might raise suspicion if someone was keeping tabs on staff movements. Steeling herself, she clung to the periphery of the room, wiping down shelves softly, hoping not to disturb the president. Despite her attempts at stealth, Kayode noticed her presence. He looked up, meeting her gaze across the distance. A swirl of unspoken emotion passed between them, an acknowledgement of the time that had slipped away, the longing that still lingered. Amina tried to keep her composure, busying herself with a dusty corner. Finally, Kayode broke the silence. "How have you been?" His voice was subdued, fraught with the weight of his current troubles. "I haven't had the chance to ask." She paused, turning slowly. "I'm well, thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. She could see the strain in his eyes. He looked tired, older, as if the joys he once carried with ease had become heavy burdens. For a moment, they stood awkwardly, neither sure how to proceed. The past month had taught them caution, but their hearts had not learned to forget. Kayode set the book aside and rose from his chair. "There's so much I want to say," he murmured, taking a few steps closer to her. But I know I shouldn't. Amina swallowed, her voice catching in her throat. I understand. She lowered her gaze, focusing on the swirl of patterns on the polished floor. The tension in the air crackled like static electricity, charging the silent library with unsaid confessions. Just then, the library door swung open, and in strode Majip, her chin high, a notebook clutched in her hand. She halted abruptly at the sight of the president and Amina standing together in an otherwise empty room. An almost imperceptible smirk played on her lips, vanishing quickly as she assumed a mask of official concern. Mr. President, I apologize for interrupting. I needed your signature on some urgent documents regarding the trade agreement with the East African bloc. Her tone was polite, but her gaze flickered to Amina, brimming with suspicion. Kaode stiffened. The air seemed to congeal. He forced a neutral expression. Of course, Majip. Thank you. He approached her, scribbling his signature where indicated. Amina, sensing danger, quickly excused herself, scurrying out of the library as discreetly as possible. An unsettling feeling weighed in her chest, as though they'd been discovered doing something improper when, in truth, they'd barely exchanged a few words. That same night, rumors blazed through certain corridors, reports of the president having private rendezvous with a housekeeper in the library. Majip wasted no time in feeding the gossip mill, albeit subtly, ensuring the rumor reached a few influential ears among the staff and possibly a stray journalist or two. Kaode soon learned of the swirling whispers, and the notion of scandal looming over Amina infuriated him more than any political crisis. If the rumor reached the tabloids, it could destroy her livelihood, her family's respectability, and overshadow any policy achievements of his administration. That prospect pushed him to a bold decision. He requested a formal meeting with Amina after her shift, through an indirect messenger, to avoid suspicion. They met in a small conference room rarely used at night, where Kaode anxiously paced the floor. Amina entered, her expression a mixture of confusion and dread. Mr. President, you asked to see me? Kaode responded with a grim nod. Amina, I won't mince words. People are talking. I know it. You know it. This is going to get worse before it gets better if we don't address it. A calm resolve shone in his eyes. And I can't stomach the idea of you being ripped apart by scandal because of me. Tears pricked Amina's eyes, though she struggled to maintain her composure. But there's nothing going on, she insisted, voice trembling. They have no proof. We haven't. She trailed off, unwilling to articulate the unspoken truth that they had merely exchanged heartfelt words and innocent gestures. Kaode placed a hand gently on the edge of the table, leaning forward. When the press is hungry, they don't need proof. Mere whispers can ruin lives. I won't allow them to ruin yours. Amina's voice trembled in quiet frustration. What can we possibly do? He exhaled heavily. The decision he'd come to was both terrifying and strangely liberating. I intend to be upfront. If they confront me about you, I'll face them publicly. Let them call it scandal, let them question it. But I'll tell the truth, you're someone valuable to me, a friend, someone I care about, who the public needs to respect just as they would any other citizen. I'm not ashamed, Amina. Her chest tightened at the raw conviction in his voice. They'll think the worst, she murmured. They'll paint me as a gold digger or worse. What about your re-election or your political alliances? Kaode met her gaze, his voice calm yet certain. If caring for someone jeopardizes my position, then so be it. I didn't become president to play along with hypocrisy. I became president to do what's right for the people, and you are one of the people, Amina. Someone deserving of dignity and respect. Tears finally escaped Amina's eyes. She let out a shaky breath. The magnitude of his words washed over her, combining fear, relief, and an uncontainable sense of gratitude. She realized in that moment that she could no longer deny her feelings for this man, who stood willing to risk everything for her sense of safety. Kaode, she whispered, disregarding formalities. I'm afraid. He moved closer, reaching for her hands. The gentle pressure of his palms against hers sent a shiver coursing through her. I'm afraid too, he admitted quietly. But I'm more afraid of losing the chance to be honest about us, whatever's, than I am of any political fallout. Drawing courage from his words, Amina allowed herself the tiniest flicker of hope. She saw a vision of a new dawn, a possibility that defied societal norms and the scorn of rumor-mongers. It might be an uphill battle, but perhaps they could face it together. She squeezed his hands, a tentative smile breaking through her tears. I want to be by your side," she said softly. "If you'll have me, that is, and if we can do it in a way that doesn't harm my family or your presidency." Kayode exhaled a sigh of relief, as if released from a long-held doubt. "We'll face the challenges one at a time," he affirmed. "Trust me, Amina, we'll find a path that honors both our responsibilities and our hearts." Outside, the first glimmers of dawn approached, a herald of new beginnings. Within the quiet conference room, the president and the cleaner stepped across an unspoken threshold of commitment. Though they stood at the brink of adversity, they also stood on the cusp of something wondrous, a love that refused to be silenced by fear, a bold new vision of hope in a modern African nation hungry for change. And so, hand in hand, they resolved to face whatever tomorrow would bring, believing that the truth of their shared humanity could conquer even the fiercest storms. The end. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing heartwarming stories almost every day. We are very grateful for your support. See you soon.